Welcome back to Startup Health Now, the podcast where we celebrate the entrepreneurs and innovators who are transforming health. I'm your host, Logan Plaster.
We have so many of these players working in different silos, and I would like to see them sort of break the silos, come together to build these solutions or leverage the data.
And that was Aishu Sukumar, my guest on the podcast today, talking about her work at Gates Ventures and as a member of Startup Health's Alzheimer's Moonshot Impact Board. As a quick reminder, our Alzheimer's Moonshot is an initiative we launched in 2024 with support from Gates Ventures and the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation to create and support a collaborative community of Alzheimer's innovators. We call it a Health Moonshot Community, and we've already welcomed our first 14 companies. I believe that it was in the very first group call where we brought these founders together that we began to see cross-pollinating collaborations form. But back to our guest, Aishu Sukumar, one of our Impact Board members, who I want to introduce you to today. It's hard to imagine a more well-rounded career path than Aishu brings to this board. She spent 6 years as a research scientist focused on oncology and some neurodegeneration.
I love doing that, right? Just answering these fundamental questions and getting really deep into some of these things.
Then she did a research fellowship at Harvard Medical School where she got to work on translating fundamental research into an actual product.
This specifically was actually a huge revelation on what actually it takes to get something from an idea to making it a viable product and bringing it to market as a solution that people would use.
Next, she dove into a health tech startup working on patient records in low resource settings.
I learned a lot in this process. You have to be scrappy in a startup. You need to wear multiple hats, work in different problems, I guess take on different roles.
At this point, Aishu wanted to round out and deepen her understanding of things like commercialization and clinical trials, so she spent a few years at a boutique consulting firm. And all of that culminated in an MBA and Master's in Public Health at Berkeley. She took a fellowship at Gates Ventures, and the rest is history. Suffice it to say, Aishu's going to be an incredible asset to our Alzheimer's Moonshot, and I'm excited for you to learn more about her in this episode. Let's get into it. Aishu Sukumar, senior lead at Gates Ventures working on Alzheimer's. Great to have you on the show. Thanks for taking a few minutes with me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here, Logan. I'm very excited to dig into things.
Is there anything about Alzheimer's that particularly drew you, or is this sort of just the culmination of a career of looking at these diagnostic tests, these biomarkers, and understanding commercialization challenges? Was there anything specific that drew you to Alzheimer's?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been, passionate about working in high burden diseases and early stage innovation. But on the personal front, when I was in college, and I was, one of my close friends' parents was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and I got to see, through her experience and everything, just how absolutely devastating this was. There's not much they could do, but watch her mother slowly struggle with dementia, and being the only child of a single parent, the entire burden kind of fell on this 20-something-year-old person. And this really made me reflect on how this is probably the reality for millions of people and how only now we're starting to scratch the surface. So there's always that interest in being able to do something about it. And this would sound pretty silly, but right from when I was in school, I would always say, like, I want to be a neuroscientist, I want to be a neurosurgeon or something like that. And that, I ultimately chose a different path, but it's very interesting that things eventually led me back to neurodegeneration and Alzheimer's.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the Diagnostics Accelerator works in action?
Sure. So like I mentioned, the Diagnostics Accelerator has this big ambition. This was established with the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, and the Gates Ventures is one of the funders of the Diagnostics Accelerator. And the goal is to bring low cost, minimally invasive, scalable, accessible diagnostic solutions to market. We think of this more as in two buckets, right? There are peripheral solutions, which is like using the peripheral biofluids, whether it is blood, saliva, urine, etc., and digital solutions. And really the goal, it kind of stemmed from a big question that we ask at Gates Ventures often on where can philanthropy make a meaningful difference and how can we tap into innovation. So through the DXA, the Diagnostics Accelerator, which we call the DXA, we support everything from early stage researchers who are working in biomarker identification and discovery, all the way to late stage companies who are really focused on bringing these solutions to market. And I think where this started with recognizing that there's the NIH and NIA funding early stage research and efforts, and you have VCs and hedge funds and other investors who invest in these companies where the risk is relatively lower and return is higher. And there was this kind of gap that needed to be filled, and we felt that this is where philanthropy can make a difference.
Let's talk about how we're able to help these promising, innovative companies commercialize and scale. We all want these companies to succeed, that have sort of the seed of an idea, to have the right makeup as a company, and yet there is this valley of death that many of them face, and for many different reasons. It could be the science, it could be the business model, it could be the team, it could be the funding, it could be how they communicate. So I'm curious to kind of break down some of those elements and understand from your perspective where you see the greatest barriers and pitfalls for some of these companies.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think this is really different, right? It really depends on the specific company and their vision and where they're at. But I think one thing that I've found where companies have had a lot of success is when they have a very clear vision, a path to it, and a strong technology.
Hmm.
Of course, that is not enough to overcome all the barriers. Like you listed, it's about the team, it's about having a very clear commercialization strategy, it's about having the right kind of experience and mindset coming together. And also, it's about making sure that the solution that they're developing is sustainable. So I would say the and also it depends, right? Sometimes you have founders who start with this scientific academic mindset, and so they have the strong technology but really have limited commercial experience in building it together, whereas others have this idea and this product or this technology that they've tapped into and they want to leverage it in Alzheimer's disease but don't necessarily have an understanding of the specific challenges in this area. So I think where we've seen the biggest success is founders who've been able to understand the value they bring to the table while also
Mm.
recognizing the gaps and challenges that they're yet to tackle, and finding an effective way to address those versus those who are like, oh, we know it all, we have it all, we got,
Yeah,
and you
that's
fall into this trap of not knowing where to go from there.
So knowing thyself, knowing your strengths and your weaknesses, so that then you can build the team to compensate for your weaknesses. It's really interesting you say that, because part of what we do with the Alzheimer's Moonshot, with our Health Moonshots, is we train the founders to work off of a SWOT analysis, which really means for them leaning into their weaknesses and threats, because they're pretty good about pitching their strengths and opportunities, but to round it out and understand their weaknesses and threats, and then to talk about that with a potential collaborator, kind of describes what you're talking about, like the transparent founder who really knows where the gaps are, because unless you have that information, you can't go and try to fill it.
Yeah. And definitely that's one of the big things that excited me personally about Startup Health. It's I think such an incredible opportunity to bring together these founders and build this community where they get to learn from each other and come together and organically even collaborate down the road and share ideas and exchange their learnings and insights. We tried doing some of it organically. I mean, in a smaller scale for our companies, and like, oh, you should consider partnering with this person, or for if you want to position your company in a good way, you have such a strong technology, but the way you're messaging out is, needs some work. But
Yeah.
internally, it's not like, we have all the right resources to support them with all the different facets, right? So, and that's where we thought Startup Health really fills this gap in niche and helping strong founders take their innovation to the next level.
We think we all love the idea of collaboration, but it's sort of like you're describing, it's really where the rubber hits the road. Will you share data? Will you share your network? Looking across the companies you've worked with, do you see any specific opportunities for collaboration? What is I guess it's like if you could wave a magic wand and get a few different companies around a table to share data, to share networks, do you have any thoughts on how collaboration could really push us forward?
Obviously, as someone who's more recently focusing primarily on diagnostics, I have a bunch of different ideas on, oh, if, imagine if you could take this, set of this company focusing on these blood-based biomarkers and someone focusing on digital tools and bring it together for this even stronger multimodal marker.
Yeah.
Imagine, like maybe you can detect the disease earlier, maybe, it can be more accurate or, push the performance to the next level. But I think, you know, what I like to also think about is beyond just diagnostics, like learning from, because it's the entire Alzheimer's disease care continuum, right?
Yeah.
So, right from tools for supporting caregivers, the education and awareness, the whole early detection and accurate diagnostics landscape space that I'm more closely involved with. But there's also the therapeutic and like, the care management. So really like, the like, okay, so now you diagnose a patient, you say, okay, you're at high risk of developing MCI or getting Alzheimer's disease. Then what? Then what do they do, right? Where do you
Yeah.
go from here?
Yeah.
And that's a question that we're still working on answering. And, after several decades of learning, and I don't want to call it failure because I do think in science, every experiment you run still teaches you something.
Yeah.
When you're not learning, you're really not progressing. So, but still, like, from all these different learnings, we're finally trying to have some solutions, but we still don't know what it is to leverage those. And, a lot of conversations on, okay, let's say you do a blood test for Alzheimer's disease and you get either a risk score or something. If it goes in your medical record, does it impact your future coverage? Does it impact like what is the meaning of this, right? When you think
Mm.
about a person's life and what happens after, even if they're not at risk of dementia today, what would happen? We still don't have so many answers beyond just a technical perspective. So I think the ecosystem, like, the different players in the ecosystem really need to come together, put their heads down and find solutions. And some of it is starting to happen, which is very encouraging to see.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up that financial point. There's a whole patient picture here. If you get early diagnosis and it crushes your premiums for the next 20 years, that didn't do you a lot of good in the long run. It's interesting to think about. It wasn't that long ago that early detection wasn't seen as particularly helpful because there was so little that we could do. Like, why even bother?
Yeah.
But I know that that is shifting, and you're right there at the tip of the spear with that. Do you feel like we're at a bit of an inflection point, or is it just sort of linear, just keep pushing and slogging it out?
I definitely think we're at an inflection point and a precipice of something. And, as someone who's relatively new to the field, it is a very exciting place to be in and a very exciting time because I hear so much from those who've been in the field for like 30 years,
Yeah.
35 years, on how there's just not been enough hope, or where it's always just been like a string of failures and like a very unclear path, and the health system broadly not even paying attention to this because there's nothing to do, versus where we are at now and being able to have this conversation, even this discussion, right? It just fills me
Yeah.
with optimism that there's definitely a lot that can be done and that there is more interest and funding that's being put in this space. And I hope we can be intentional in leveraging this momentum and driving forward.
You mentioned a minute ago innovation around caregivers. It's such a burden globally.
Mhm.
Millions of people secondarily affected, their whole lives shifted because of caring for someone with Alzheimer's. Are you seeing any innovation that can really support the caregiver? Obviously, there's no biomarker, there's no pill, there's no simple solution for this complex challenge, but are you seeing anything?
I would say I'm a little more peripheral to that space, in the caregiver innovation space, but I definitely do come across from time to time innovations in that space, right? Like whether it is around more education awareness or it is around direct support solutions for caregivers, or everything from um, a lot sometimes the big problem is not knowing enough, right? Oh, my this person that I'm caring for is experiencing symptoms. They're forgetting things. Like, how serious is this? How do I support them? And like, not knowing builds anxiety. I was talking to this person, again, as I mentioned, my friend who's been supporting the parent, and a big challenge for them was, I don't know how much of this is normal and how much of this needs immediate attention. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do here to set them up for success and to help myself also, like make sure I have a little bit of a life, beyond just constantly worrying about this. And
Yeah.
I do think education awareness goes a long way with that.
Mhm.
Um, and we do see more solutions there. But I will say I'm also a little more peripherally involved in the space. I'm more directly involved in the actual detection and diagnostic space.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand. But it's good to hear that you're sort of seeing a little bit of that bubble up as well. I mean, it's certainly a challenging thing to address, and there's no simple solution. When you think about your friend who's, helping their parent through this, and you think about the work that you're doing, look out 2 to 5 years. How would you like for that patient experience and the caregiver experience? How would you like that to be concretely different because of the work that you're doing at Gates Ventures, at the Accelerator, and at Startup Health?
Well, I see it as twofold. One is, the actual, like, leveraging technology and leveraging the advancement that we just have in general from a technological perspective, whether it is, AI ML based solutions or learnings, to build solutions that are more patient and caregiver centric. And the second piece is, like I mentioned, just education awareness, having more concrete guidelines. Like, one thing, it's great that there are all these solutions, but second is actually them reaching the right intended people. So I think, bridging that gap would also be important.
Yeah.
um, I would like to see founders and innovators in this particular space also take that lens and keep that account, and I know a lot of them do. So I wouldn't be surprised that if we do see ourselves in a different realm, 5 years down the line.
This is a related question, but I want to close with a call for innovation.
Mhm.
You're deep in the science. You understand what's going on through your multiple advanced degrees, biomechanical engineering, I think, public health, et cetera, pathology. Um, what would you like to have pitched to you? What would you like to see come across your desk over the next year or so? Let's say the Alzheimer's Moonshot expands from 25, 30 companies to 60, and there's this greater ability to support companies. What are some solutions that you would like to see submitted to you?
That's an excellent question. Like I mentioned before, I would love to see more collaboration and more multimodal solutions for detection of Alzheimer's disease. I think I think different solutions target different parts of the continuum and, have different capabilities of identifying patients. And I do believe there is power in some of these solutions coming together. I would also love to see, we have so many of these players working in different silos. And I would like to see them sort of break the silos, come together to build these solutions or leverage the data, right? At Gates Ventures, we also support the Alzheimer's Disease Data Initiative, where really the goal is to bring different data together to democratize the data and provide access to this data for. And I want to see more companies leveraging this because, as you build these, as you leverage machine learning models and, data becomes so important. We see so many companies that have a strong technology, but they just don't have enough data to train their model on or to test their model in, and they're desperately trying to find the right cohorts and identify the right patient population to test and build the solutions around. And I want to see that. And I think from a technical perspective, I would like us to think beyond, like, the we're primarily looking at amyloid as a as a primary biomarker, and in plasma it is relatively weaker, and now we're looking more closely at tau. I do think we need to look beyond amyloid and tau and also consider co-pathologies, whether it's the alpha-syn pathology, TDP-43, and get a more nuanced understanding of the subpopulations within the Alzheimer's disease space. I think that would be important to be able to classify so that you can get the right therapeutics to the right patient and almost go towards a more personalized medicine approach.
I love it. I love it. And Aishu, you're speaking our language of breaking down those silos, getting folks to talk to one another, share information, and I hope we can get that your personal call for innovation out to the world, so that these folks. I know there's people working on this all around the world. We've already seen that with the first 100 applicants to the Moonshot, and people coming in every day, really amazing founders. So here's hoping that this reaches the right folks and we're able to bring them together through this process. And I'm super excited that you're part of this impact board.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a very exciting start, and I hope I'm pretty confident that we'll accomplish something meaningful here. And thanks to you and the Startup Health team for honestly bringing all the different innovators and leaders in the space together and building this strong community as well.
Well, Aishu, thanks for taking time with me today, and I wish you well.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Startup Health Now. We'll be back again with another episode next week.